Hello and welcome to another episode of Handloader TV. I'm your host Jeremiah, and in this episode we have a very exciting product that we're going to be talking about and featuring here on the channel. It's something that's actually been in the background of a lot of our videos, and we've been doing a lot of product testing behind the scenes. And that product is this guy right here. This is the Garmin Xero C1 Pro Chronograph. And so far I've been really impressed with the results we've been getting with it. Its ease of use, ease of setup, and just the accuracy that it has as a whole as a chronograph unit. So in this episode, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be comparing the velocities we get from the Garmin C1 Pro chronograph with the old tried and true lab radar chronograph, and then the chronograph that we use most frequently here on the channel, which is the Oehler Model 35P chronograph. This is kind of the gold standard in the industry. Oehler makes a lot of the pressure testing equipment in use at places like Nosler and Xero and places like that, where they're actually pressure testing and velocity testing ammunition. So they're a great company, it's a great unit, and something that we've been using for a very long time, and we wanted to put the Garmin head-to-head with these other chronographs. And as you can see, there's also quite a few different firearms here on the table, and there's a good reason for that. But for now, let's go ahead and dive into the specifics of each of these chronographs. So the first chronograph we'll start out talking about is the Oehler Model 35P chronograph. This is a great chronograph. You've seen it used on the channel for the past several years. It's what a lot of our writers in Handloader magazine use to test their velocity and compare pressures and things of that nature. This 35P has a built-in printer, that's what the P stands for, and it's a pretty simple unit. It uses tried and true technology using the Oehler SkyScreen 3, which looks like this right here, and you plug this SkyScreen along with three others into the back of the unit, and then your bullet travels between these screens. Now obviously you have to be careful not to strike these screens with your projectile, and that's something you have to be aware of when you're working with this particular chronograph. And it does make the setup a little bit longer. On average, I'd say it takes about 15 minutes to get this set up properly, but once it's set up, you're good to go for the rest of the day. Another unique thing about the Oehler system is it actually uses three of these sky screens, and it has a proof channel which checks the velocity against the other two sky screens. So it ensures that you're getting very accurate data every time from shot to shot. Another nice feature is the Oehler 35P is user adjustable. You can change the length of the bar and the spacing of the sky screens to fit your needs. The longer the spacing, the more accurate the data will be. And there's inputs in the battery compartment here, little switches that you can change to configure the chronograph for whatever your need. It can also do shotgun velocity, which is something that a lot of chronographs cannot do. In testing the Garmin, it cannot do shotguns. In testing the lab radar, it most certainly cannot do shotguns. So that's one big advantage to the Oehler Model 35P. If you're an avid shotgun hand loader, then this is probably the best chronograph on the market for you. Next up, we have the lab radar, which is another unit that we've used quite a bit here on the channel, usually as a backup if it's a super overcast day. Sometimes that can affect the Oehler Model 35P sky screens. So we'll pull this out just to ensure that we get an accurate velocity reading. In testing and over the years, it's been very accurate. Its reliability is pretty good, but it does tend to miss shots from time to time when compared to the Oehler Model 35P, which again, I'm considering the gold standard for this video. It does have an app that connects to your phone. It also has an external battery pack you can add so it lasts longer. It also contains AA batteries in here, which is nice. You have a bit of a dual fuel function, if you will, to steal that nomenclature from Surefire. It can store a plethora of data on an SD card, and you can upload that data straight to an Excel spreadsheet, which personally I'm a big fan of. The app for the phone is a little bit clunky on this thing, but I find it very useful for deleting many shot strings. If I test 50 loads in a day, I can go through and edit those all at once on the phone, which is a nice feature as compared to having to work the buttons and enter things manually. The app also makes it a little bit easier to enter things like your projectile weight and stuff like that. There are a couple of downsides to this though, most notably is it can be very difficult to trigger, And as a result, for all of our testing, we're going to be using an air gun trigger, which is just a little microphone that will plug into the unit itself, and it will pick up the report of the bullet leaving the barrel, and it will start recording our velocities for us. So that's very handy, and it greatly reduces the chance of the lab radar not picking up your shot. Another thing to note on this lab radar is it will only pick up shots that are right around 4,000 feet per second and below. So if you're talking any of your ultra high-speed varmint cartridges like this 17 Remington Fireball, 22-250, 220 Swift, you can run into some issues with the lab radar chronograph, and that's something to be aware of there. Overall, it's a pretty good unit though, and we've used it quite a bit. Now, last but not least, we have the Garmin Xero Pro Chronograph. Big fan of this guy. It's been behind the scenes in a lot of videos. I've done a lot of comparisons to check accuracy against all three of these chronographs, which is what we're going to be doing in a moment here. And it stacks up very nicely. It's battery powered, which is rechargeable, no replaceable batteries on it. 4 simple buttons on top operate the unit, and it comes with this nice little handy dandy tripod that simply threads into the bottom. It also has an app on the phone, and it is very, very easy to use. We'll talk about that more in a little bit towards the end of this video after shooting. But overall, a great product, and it will record velocities up to 5,000 feet per second, which is going to encompass, I'm going to say 99% of your cartridges out there. There are very few cartridges that will break that 5,000 feet per second mark, and they're pretty weird and esoteric. For that, you would need a Model 35P. But overall, it's a great unit. I've enjoyed working with it. Now, what do you say we go ahead and take these things? We'll go ahead and head out to the range, put these chronographs against each other. But before we do that, we'll go ahead and talk through really quick some of the rifles we have before us. For this test, we've selected quite the wide variety of cartridges and calibers for testing out these units. So we're going to start out with 4 handguns, the first of which here is going to be an FN 502 tactical, a 22 long rifle with a dead air mask HD suppressor on the end of it. That's something that we really wanted to put to the test because sometimes the lab radar, without that airgun trigger added, the suppressor, it won't pick up the shot if you're shooting suppressed or subsonic ammunition. And we also want to put that to the test on all 3 chronographs: subsonic ammunition with a suppressor, supersonic ammunition, a wide variety. So there's the FN 502. The next one we have here is a 45 Colt from Cimarron Firearms. Very nice gun. I've used this one quite a bit over the years, and I've carried it a lot on horseback. I'm very fond of this gun. Nice stainless steel finish on this guy. And a 45 Colt is a large, slow projectile. It should be very easy for all of these chronographs to track, and hopefully it'll provide a good baseline of comparison for the different velocities we're bound to pick up from each of these chronographs. Then next, right here below this M16 here, we have an FNX Tactical, chambered in 45 Auto, with a suppressor on that as well. So a big, slow-moving subsonic round, just in case something fails to pick up the 22 long rifle. Then last but not least, we have a rather obscure cartridge, the 5.7 by 28, which is chambered in this FN57 handgun. And that's a very high velocity handgun round. And it's also operating right on the cusp of where the Garmin unit says, is it a handgun cartridge or is it a rifle cartridge? So we wanted to see if we would have any issues picking up that particular cartridge with this handgun. So then rolling on to the rifles, we have in the back here, this is a Cimarron lever action, model 1873 Winchester reproduction, chambered in 45 Colt. Rifle length barrel on that guy, so it'll be fun to see how well the velocities compare to the 5.5-inch barrel of the single action Army reproduction there. Very nice rifle overall, chambered 45 Colt, one of my personal favorite cartridges. Then up front here, we actually did a load development video featuring this rifle. This is a custom AR-15 that I built, chambered in 300 Blackout. We're going to shoot subsonic ammunition through that with the suppressor on, just see how that goes through all 3 of the chronographs. Then next here we have a Harrington & Richardson M16, which was actually technically made by us. It is a True Blue M16, 20-inch barrel, 5.56 NATO chambering. Looking to get about 3,000 feet per second out of this particular rifle with the load we're using. And then last but not least, it wouldn't be a complete video if we didn't throw in something that's rather difficult for all three of these chronographs. This is a 17 Remington Fireball loaded up with a proprietary load that we worked up. And we should be seeing somewhere around 4,300 feet per second with this rifle using a 15.5 grain Hornady NTX 17 caliber projectile. That's going to be very small and very hard for all three of these chronographs to pick up, especially at that kind of velocity. So there you have it. There's a quick and down and dirty on the rifles and the handguns that we'll be testing. Let's go ahead and hit the range and see how these chronographs do. So as you can see, we're out on the range now. We have a target, a steel plate, downrange at 100 yards, and we've got a wide variety of rifles, handguns, and cartridges that we're going to shoot over 3 different chronographs today. First up, we have the Oehler Model 35P chronograph, which is the gold standard. It's what we normally use for all of our load development and velocity testing. It's set up 10 feet from the muzzle to record all of our velocities, and the setup time for that chronograph is right around 15 minutes. You can cut it down to maybe 10 if you move quick, but it does take some time to set up, and especially to properly align with the muzzle of the rifle. The next chronograph that we have out here is the Lab Radar chronograph. It uses Doppler radar and a triggering mechanism, such as that microphone there, to detect the shot and track your velocity. And it's able to track velocity out to about 100 yards depending on the cartridge you're shooting. It takes about maybe 10 minutes or so to set up and get it all dialed in and make sure you're the proper distance from the muzzle and select your projectile weight and all that good stuff. So much easier than the Oehler and much faster. And then last but not least, we have the brand new Garmin chronograph here, which has been actually featured in a few videos behind the scenes, unbeknownst to the viewer. So we have a ton of velocity data to compare to not only the Lab Radar, but our Oehler Model 35P as well, in addition to all the data that we're going to be collecting today. And the setup time for the Garmin is right around 30 seconds. Last but not least, I'll give you a quick rundown on the weather. It's a beautiful day. Temperature, according to Kestrel 5700, is 71.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity is 31.5%. Pressure is 30.16 when adjusted for elevation, which is at 5,000 feet. Wind is currently blowing from 1 to 0 miles per hour from the 5 o'clock position. So very nice day. What do you say we go ahead and get started, and we'll put these chronographs to the test. So first up, we're going to go ahead and shoot 45 Colt and see how well these 3 chronographs pick it up. Very slow moving, large projectile. So all 3 chronographs should obviously have no problem with this, but it'll make for some interesting velocity comparisons. Shooting 250 grain round nose projectiles with unique powder here. So far it looks like all the chronographs are reading real close to each other. Real close. Not too bad. I'd say within 5 feet per second, give or take. Let's move on to the next rifle. All right, so now we've swapped over to the 300 Blackout. This is a custom AR-15 that I built a while back. We have a separate load development video that features this rifle on the 300 Blackout. I'd encourage you to check that out if you're interested in loads for that cartridge. Chronographs are all set up, ready to go. Let's put a couple of rounds downrange now. Oh yeah, you can hear that 220 grain projectile slapping the steel real well. Bolts locked back, we're all clear. Looks like the lab radar actually picked up all 3 shots this time. Same with the Garmin and the Oehler as well. Let's go ahead and move on to the next rifle. So now we've swapped over to the M16. This is made by Harrington and Richardson, sold through Palmetto State Armory, and it's chambered in 5.56 NATO. All 3 chronographs are set up, good to go. Let's put a few rounds on the steel. All right, lab radar picked up all 3, Garmin's got all 3, and the Oehler has all 3. All right, so up until this point, all the chronographs have had it pretty easy. We're shooting relatively normal projectiles, relatively normal cartridges. Now we've gone ahead and we've swapped over to the beautiful custom Remington Model 7 rifle here, chambered in 17 Remington Fireball. It's shooting a very, very small projectile, 17 caliber, 15.5 grain Hornady NTX bullet. And to be honest with you, I'll be shocked if the lab radar even picks up this projectile at all. I'm a little bit more optimistic about the Garmin, and I'm pretty sure the Oehler will pick it up no problem. But let's go ahead and put that to the test and see what happens. So lab radar's error, could not track projectile. Both Garmin and Oehler chronographs picked that up, no problem. Once again, error on the lab radar. Garmin and Oehler picked it up. Last shot. No reading on the lab radar. Garmin and Oehler both picked up those shots. All right, so once again, all 3 chronographs set up, ready to go. Here we have the FN 502 chambered in 22 long rifle. And we actually did a separate load development video. Well, not load development, but we did some testing with this gun previously, and we have a dedicated video on that if you guys are interested and want to check that out. Let's go ahead and see how these chronographs do. Not sure if you guys can hear that or not, but this little 22 in this surprising amount of wind is actually hitting that going at 100 yards. Sometimes it's hard to pick up over the wind, but very impressive little 22 here. And let's see here. It doesn't look like the lab radar picked that up at all. It is so quiet, even with the microphone set on trigger position 1. It's still very finicky. It is what it is. We've used this quite a bit and had similar results. I think that's another reason why it didn't pick up the 45 Colt. But the Garmin and the Oehler picked up all 3 shots. So spot on there. So now we've got something a little bit easier for the lab radar to pick up, and the other 2 chronographs as well. This is a Cimarron 45 Colt, single action Army clone. We're shooting 255 grain Keith semi-wad cutters. So let's go ahead and See if these chronographs pick these guys up. All 3 shots, no problem. So now we've gone ahead and swapped over to the FNX 45 Tactical with a Silencer Co. Omega 45 on the end of it here. And all 3 chronographs are ready to go. So let's send a few rounds and see if they pick this guy up. And LabRadar picked up all 3 of those. So did the Garmin and the Oehler 35P. All right, so we've got all 3 chronographs, LabRadar, Garmin, and Oehler ready to go. This is a FN57, chambered in none other than the infamous 5.7 by 28. Our LabRadar has already picked up some erroneous velocity readings from the wind blowing in the microphone. That can happen when you have the sensitivity up, but you have to have the sensitivity up if you're shooting suppressed rifles like we were earlier. So let's go ahead and send a few rounds. And there you have it. So before we close out our range time, our LabRadar is run out of batteries at this point, but the Garmin's still going and so is the Oehler. So we thought we'd have a little bit of fun and just send a few rounds as quick as we can downrange and see if these 2 chronographs can pick them up. From previous experience with the LabRadar, it probably doesn't matter that it's dead. But here we go. 3 rounds very quickly. All right, so the Garmin picked up 2 of those shots and the Oehler picked up 2 of those shots. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So earlier in this video, I did allude to this being an M16, which it is, and I figured we'll get to that part now and just have a little bit of fun. I don't think there's much hope of these chronographs picking up all 3 shots, but we'll see what happens. We got 1 out of 3. So we're back from the range now and we have a ton of velocity data, standard deviations and things like that to go over. Let's go ahead and dive right into it, starting out with the first cartridge that we put to the test, which was 45 Colt in this Cimarron lever action rifle. So taking a look at the data here, the Oehler Model 35P chronograph picked up all 3 shots, along with the Garmin chronograph picking up all 3 shots, while the LabRadar only picked up 1 shot. So you can see that data there on your screen, compare and contrast, pause the video if you need to at any point through this review, so you can compare and see how the velocities compared to each other. But we're going to go ahead and move on to the next cartridge and rifle that we tried, which was this AR-15 and 300 Blackout. And all 3 chronographs, Garmin, Oehler, and the LabRadar, picked up all 3 shots. And we got some pretty interesting numbers there. Standard deviations are pretty close to one another. Extreme spreads are really close to one another. Generally speaking there, it looks like they're all within 1 foot per second or less, which goes to tell you that these chronographs are very consistent in gathering the extreme spreads of the velocity But of course this changes as we continue on and we look at different cartridges such as the 5.56 NATO next here. All 3 shots were recorded by all 3 chronographs. Standard deviations were pretty similar to each other, especially the Garmin and the LabRadar, while the Oehler was just a little bit different. But again, extreme spreads between the Garmin and the Oehler were very close, while the LabRadar has it a little bit lower. Then we went ahead and swapped over to the 17 Remington Fireball, which the average velocity for just those 3 shots was 4,358 feet per second according to the Garmin, and the other 2 were roughly about the same. However, the third chronograph, the LabRadar, failed to pick up any of these shots, and to be honest with you, that's kind of what I was expecting. It's way above that 4,000 feet per second mark that the LabRadar can effectively record. So unfortunately, no velocities were recorded there. But the Garmin did a good job keeping up with the Oehler in regards to such a small caliber and light projectile. Then we went ahead and swapped on over to the handgun side of things, starting out with the FN 502 22 long rifle. Only 2 of the chronographs recorded. The third chronograph, the LabRadar, failed to record any velocities for this. And I have a hunch it's because it was so quiet and it was a little bit windy on the day we were testing as well. And I don't think even with the microphone on there, the LabRadar could pick up the report of the 22 long rifle. It is very quiet with this suppressor on there when you're shooting subsonic ammunition, which we were in this case, in particular a 42 grain Gemtech load. So there you have it, good standard deviations, extreme spreads pretty close to each other, and the average is a little bit off, but within 10 feet per second or so. Then we went ahead and swapped over to 45 Colt, and we have the velocities from all 3 chronographs on this cartridge. The LabRadar, Oehler, and Garmin all being pretty close to each other, but that's kind of to be expected, especially since the 45 Colt is such a large, slow-moving projectile. Then we have the 45 Auto, which has a suppressor on it. And this time the LabRadar did record that. It was a little bit louder, a little bit more powder behind it than the 22, and it picked it up no problem there. We got all 3 shots recorded on all 3 of the chronographs. Pretty good standard deviations with this load and extreme spreads there as well, which is nice to see. Pretty consistent across the board. Then we went ahead and swapped over to our final handgun, which is the FN 5.7 by 28. A really interesting little cartridge, and it was kind of right on the cusp of what the Garmin says is either rifle or handgun velocities. And overall, it performed very well. It picked up all 3 shots for all 3 chronographs, no problems there. And you can see the data there and kind of compare and contrast and see what the differences for yourself are. So there you have it. That's pretty much all the thorough testing we did, but we did throw in a couple of little fun things in the end. We had this M16 out there. We shot it on semi-automatic rather quickly just to see if the chronographs would pick it up, and I think at this point in our test, the LabRadar batteries were really starting to go. And based on previous experience, the LabRadar does not pick up rapid-fire shots. There are some chronographs on the market that will do that, and some of them will even do rate of fire. But sadly, none of these chronographs are really capable of that. The Garmin and the Oehler are only able to pick up 2 of the 3 shots rapid fire in semi-automatic. Then, as I alluded to earlier, the M16 is a true blue M16, and so in good fashion, we flipped the switch. And the 2 chronographs were only able to pick up 1 of the 3 shots fired, but that is to be expected, and it was a lot of fun to play with that. So there you have it. There's all the information. Feel free to pause, rewind, review that information, compare and contrast. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And now we want to go ahead and take a moment to kind of talk about the Garmin unit itself, some of its features, some of the pros and cons, my personal experience with it, and what I like about the chronograph itself. Now that you've seen all the data, you can make an educated decision for yourself. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the Garmin chronograph. So now that we have a good amount of reference data for you guys to go off of based on the testing that we did with all 3 of the chronographs, the features of this Garmin, we want to go ahead and give you the quick rundown on it. It's a very easy to set up unit. It takes about 30 seconds, and you simply thread in the tripod, open up the legs, and you're good to go. Turn it on, which I'm going to go ahead and do right now, and let it connect with the Garmin Chronograph app on my phone, which is a really nice feature. It's got 4 buttons on top which you can use to navigate through the menus. You can change your data fields. Anybody who's familiar with Garmin products, whether it's their watches or their GPSs, stuff like that, you're going to find a very easy to navigate menu system. Now, going ahead and looking at the app here that I have on my phone, we'll pull this guy up now, and we can see that I have my session that we just did here recently. Rifle cartridges, handgun cartridges, and it tells you how many shots, the standard deviation, all that good stuff. And up at the top of the menu here, you can see that it says May 10th. And then if I want to go into other sessions, I can sort them by pistol cartridge or rifle cartridge, and I can go back even further. It can store up to 100 sessions on here, and I think the maximum shot number for each session is 100 shots, but don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure on that. Haven't had a chance to put that to the test just yet. So overall, it's a really easy to use, simple to use unit, and you can tap any one of these little sessions here and you can get all the information you want, from extreme spread to standard deviation, minimum and maximum velocity. It also calculates your average kinetic energy, which is kind of neat, and it can also calculate your power factor as well. Now, going over to the unit itself, it's very simple. You have an OK button, you have a back button, you have an up and a down button. So 4 buttons, you hold the back button, that's your power button. From there, you can use the up and down buttons to navigate through the menu. And rather than show you all the setup on that, it's really very easy. You'd simply, if you wanted to start recording velocity, you'd hit new session, hit continue, select whether you're using a rifle, pistol, bow, or air rifle, and then you'd select the velocity range. You'd enter your projectile weight, and then it tells you how to align the unit. It says it needs to be 5 inches to 15 inches from the muzzle of a rifle, and that changes from a handgun and bow and things of that nature, but it tells you where to place the unit. And in doing this, in our testing, this unit is extremely forgiving in that 5 to 15 inches from the muzzle of the firearm you're using. Basically, I've had this thing 6 feet away and still been able to pick up velocity with it. So very forgiving, much easier to set up and use than the lab radar. So there you pretty much have it. That's the lowdown, the quick and dirty on the Garmin C1 Pro chronograph. I tell you what, it's something that we are going to be using on this channel a lot more, given its accuracy, and just the ease of setup alone makes it worthwhile. And its size is very compact. I actually had a writer who's also a good friend of mine. He 3D prints a lot of stuff. Reloading Quest is his Instagram handle if you're interested in picking up one of these boxes he made for these chronographs. Really like it. Got nice little snap locks on there. Open it up, and it's got a spot for your charging cable right there. Nice padded foam in there, so you can go ahead and power off your unit when you're done. Close it up and unthread the tripod from the unit. And he's got a little tiny cutout on the bottom there for that. And then you can go ahead and place the next piece of foam in there. And your chronograph is nice and securely stored in the box itself. And then up here at the top, we've got some foam for the charging cord as well, which is very nice. That closes nice and secure, and then positively snaps. So this is great because the Garmin chronograph only comes with a cardboard box, and when you pay that much money for a unit, you definitely want to protect it. So I'd highly recommend checking these guys out. Again, it's Reloading Quest on Instagram. He's got an Etsy store where you can pick up these boxes, and he does other things like loading trays and stuff like that. So there you have it. There is the Garmin Pro chronograph. I'm really happy with it. Overall, you're going to be seeing a lot more of this on the channel. So thank you so much for watching. We greatly appreciate it. We hope that you liked this video, and if you did, be sure to give us a thumbs up, let us know. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're notified when we post our next video. We've got a lot of exciting stuff in the works, and I can't wait to to showcase it for you guys. And as always, any comments, questions, be sure to leave those in the comment section. I do read every single one of those, and I try to respond to every one of them, but that's getting very difficult as of lately since the channel's grown so much. So thanks so much, and I'll catch you in the next episode.